In the barren stillness of northern Nevada, where the mountains cast long shadows across the sand, there once stood a World War II internment camp, forgotten by time, erased by dust. Locals rarely spoke of it except in murmurs carried by the wind. It was here, amid the fences and barracks, that a story began, not of soldiers or generals, but of a dog. They said his name was Scout, a shepherd mix that belonged to one of the guards. Loyal, clever, and restless, he became the camp's quiet spirit. Children of internees would watch him from afar, tail wagging through the fence, his bark echoing against the desert hills. Then, one night, he vanished. No one saw him slip away, and no one ever found him. The desert has a way of keeping secrets. Sandstorms erased tracks, fences rusted, and barracks fell silent. But every generation or so, someone camping nearby would claim to hear it, a bark, faint and distant, rolling through the canyons like a memory refusing to die. 8 decades later, that sound would return. The workers thought it was just the wind, until they heard it again. The site had no name on modern maps, only coordinates scribbled on an old Army document. Camp McLean, 1942-1946. It was built quickly, as most wartime camps were, with barracks of pine and tar paper, guard towers of steel, and a perimeter that hummed with tension. Japanese-American families, trucked in from California and Oregon, called it the middle of nowhere. To them, the desert felt endless, a place where time itself seemed to stop. But for the soldiers stationed there, the isolation was a different kind of prison. One of them, a young corporal named James Dalton, brought with him a companion, a gray and brown dog rescued on his journey west. Scout became a rare comfort in a place filled with suspicion. Children fed him scraps through the wire. Guards tossed him sticks. Then, as autumn 1943 settled in, strange things began to happen. Lights flickered in the guard towers. Radios picked up whispers that weren't in English. And on one cold October night, Scout disappeared without a sound. No footprints. No struggle. Just silence. Why would a dog vanish in the middle of the desert? And why would people decades later still hear his bark? According to Dalton's surviving journal, the night Scout vanished was marked by a dry lightning storm, the kind that lights up the sky but never touches the ground. Guards reported hearing static in their radios, while internees huddled in fear as the sky tore itself open. Dalton wrote, "Scout kept pacing, ears back, watching the horizon like something was calling him. He tied the dog near his bunk, but by dawn the rope was torn. Some said coyotes took him. Others swore they saw a figure walking into the dunes, followed by a 4-legged shadow. 3 days later, a group of soldiers found paw prints leading toward an old mining shaft, one that had been sealed off since the 1920s. The shaft was reopened briefly, but nothing was found inside. Just air thick with dust and a faint smell of something burnt. Dalton never forgave himself. He wrote that Scout had been pulled by something out there, something that wanted him gone. 80 years later, when construction crews uncovered the old shaft again, the first thing they heard was a single bark echoing up from below. Could sound travel that far through time? Nevada's desert doesn't forget. It only hides. Beneath its cracked surface lie relics of war, dog tags, shell casings, fragments of lives once lived. Archaeologists call it temporal layering, where the past refuses to stay buried. When the 2020s construction project began near the old camp, no one expected history to respond. Workers were laying the foundation for a solar field when one man, a night watchman, reported hearing scratching sounds under the gravel. He thought it was desert wildlife, until he heard a bark. Security cameras captured nothing. Audio sensors picked up only faint frequencies, too irregular to classify. Still, every night at exactly 2:13 a.m., the same sound returned. Was it an echo of the past? A trick of temperature and wind? Or was something alive beneath them? Old-timers from nearby towns came forward, recalling stories their grandparents told, of a ghost dog that patrolled the dunes, protecting the forgotten souls of the camp. If the desert had a guardian, could it still be waiting? In February 2023, the construction team halted work when a grader collapsed into a sinkhole. What they uncovered below stunned them. a perfectly round opening, reinforced with timber that hadn't seen daylight in 80 years. The old mine was real, the same one mentioned in Dalton's journal. A team descended with lights and cameras, their breath forming clouds in the stale air. The deeper they went, the more it smelled of rust and something faintly organic. Then came the sound. Not a bark this time, but a whimper. It echoed through the tunnels, faint but unmistakable. When one worker called out, the sound stopped instantly. Then, from the dark, came the clink of metal, like a dog tag hitting stone. When retrieved, it was nearly illegible, but one word could still be read. Scout. What could survive untouched for 8 decades and still carry a sound? James Dalton's service record ended abruptly in 1945. The Army listed him as mentally unfit after a breakdown during demobilization. His family later said he was haunted by what he'd seen or heard in the desert. Letters discovered in 1972 describe him returning to Nevada several times after the war, searching the dunes with a flashlight and a whistle. Locals claimed they'd see him talking to the sand, calling for a dog that never came. In his final entry, dated 1956, Dalton wrote, "He's not gone. He's guarding something. I can feel him when the wind shifts." Was it grief? Madness? Or did he sense a truth the rest of us had buried? When workers found his old whistle half buried near the collapsed shaft, they noticed something impossible. When held to the wind, it produced a faint echoing bark. Coincidence or call and answer? Declassified military files suggest that some camps, especially remote ones like McLean, hosted unofficial communication experiments. Radio engineers tested long-range frequencies designed to bounce off the desert floor. What if those frequencies captured more than voices? Dalton's journal mentioned that Scout would react violently whenever the camp radios buzzed, as if hearing something humans could not. Historians now wonder if those tests inadvertently recorded sounds that weren't meant to be heard, or perhaps imprinted them into the desert itself. Sound, after all, is energy, and energy doesn't disappear, it lingers. Could Scout's bark have become a kind of acoustic fossil, a haunting, preserved by the dry Nevada air? Or was the truth far stranger? Internees often spoke of the night of the barking spirits. A surviving child's diary describes the sound of dogs circling the camp, though no dogs were there. The elders told her it was a sign of release, that even the animals wanted to flee captivity. After the war, the camp was bulldozed, its foundation swallowed by sand. Yet, for decades, hikers claimed to hear dogs at dusk, their howls rising from empty valleys. Archaeologists found no bones, no kennels, only faint impressions in the soil, shaped like paw prints. Was Scout just one dog among many? Or was his spirit bound to something larger, a symbol of loyalty that refused to fade? The more they dug, the louder the sounds became. By the summer of 2024, the site was active again. Researchers installed seismic and acoustic monitors across the area. The data revealed irregular spikes, rhythmic, patterned, almost deliberate. When the patterns were converted into audio, the result was chilling, the sound of a dog panting, followed by a single bark. Experts were divided. Some said it was geological noise, wind trapped in old tunnels. Others believed it was a residual frequency, a ghost made of sound waves. But those who stood there in person felt it differently. The air would grow colder, their radios would crackle, and then, softly, that familiar sound would echo through the night. 80 years of silence, broken by a single voice. When the shaft was excavated for safety, workers found fragments of wood, metal tools, and one astonishing relic, a leather collar, hardened by time but intact. The brass tag read simply, "Scout, property of U.S. Army." The discovery made headlines in Nevada, but when the collar was tested, researchers found microscopic traces of iron oxide and calcium, elements consistent not with bone, but with sandstone. It was as if the collar had fused with the desert itself, becoming part of the landscape. How could that happen? And why did the lab technician, days later, swear he heard barking through the ventilation system as he handled the sample? Coincidence? Or connection? A historian uncovered one final document from the National Archives, a coded memorandum marked Restricted Psychological Research. The note referenced animal behavioral conditioning in high-frequency environments. The experiment was terminated after multiple specimen anomalies. No names were listed except one, Dalton J. Handler. Could Scout have been part of something darker? A test subject for sonic warfare? If so, what effect would those experiments have had on him? Or on the desert itself? Perhaps his disappearance wasn't an accident, but an escape. Perhaps the barking we hear today isn't his voice, but a recording still trapped in the earth. When journalists visited the site in autumn 2025, their audio gear picked up what they described as a low, pulsing resonance. Then, faintly, beneath the hum of wind and dust, a bark. Once, twice, 3 times. No one spoke. The sound grew louder, circling the perimeter as if moving in a slow patrol. Cameras captured the sand shifting in smooth, circular patterns. Moments later, the wind ceased entirely. A single paw print appeared in the dirt, too defined to be ancient, too real to ignore. Could something, or someone, still be guarding the camp? Paranormal researchers now call the site the Barking Basin. Audio frequencies recorded there don't behave like ordinary sound. They bend, delay, even reverse themselves, as if the desert is replaying moments from its own memory. Some visitors report feeling watched. Others say they've seen a shape moving in the heat mirage. 4-legged, silent, watching from the ridge. Skeptics call it mass hysteria. Believers call it loyalty beyond death. But when you stand there at twilight, listening to the shifting wind, you begin to understand why people still come, searching not for proof, but for presence. Because sometimes, presence is proof. To this day, no one can fully explain what was recorded beneath the Nevada sand. The official report labels it environmental anomaly. The workers who heard it prefer another term, haunting. Dalton's descendants still visit the site each year, leaving a metal bowl filled with water beside a rusted fence post. In the morning, the bowl is always empty, though no footprints lead to or from it. Locals say it's Scout, still guarding what was lost. Others think it's the land itself, remembering the cruelty of confinement and the loyalty that outlasted it. Either way, the bark continues, faint, eternal, and strangely comforting. In the heart of the Nevada desert, the wind still carries that voice, a sound that should have vanished 80 years ago, yet refuses to fade. Whether it's a spirit, a sonic fossil, or the desert's way of remembering, no one can say for certain. But the story of Scout, the dog who disappeared and never truly left, reminds us that memory has its own form of life, and sometimes loyalty echoes longer than war, longer than time, longer than death itself. So, when the workers heard that familiar bark in the night, they didn't run. They stood still and listened. Because history doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it howls. History doesn't vanish. It gets buried. Subscribe for more Forgotten Frontiers.